Welcome to this new episode of our series dedicated to the great minds of political and economic thought. Today, we delve into the life and mind of a man who, although coming from the oldest nobility in France, managed to become the greatest analyst and prophet of modern democracy. A man who, in the 19th century, described with almost frightening precision the societies in which we live today. That man is Alexis de Tocqueville. Through this narrative, we will explore his biography, his major works, his political accomplishments, and also understand why this genius, praised in the United States, was ignored for so long, even forgotten, in his own country. Chapter 1. The Roots of an Aristocrat Facing Modernity. Alexis Charles-Henri Clérel, Count of Tocqueville, was born in Paris on July 29, 1805. He came from a family of very old Norman nobility. His family heritage was heavy, branded by history. His family indeed suffered the full brunt of the Revolutionary Terror. His great-grandfather was none other than Malesherbes, the illustrious lawyer of Louis XVI, guillotined in 1794. His parents themselves narrowly escaped the scaffold, saved by the fall of Robespierre. It is in this legitimist environment, bruised but proud, that young Alexis grew up. However, very early on, he detached himself from the illusions of his caste. After brilliant law studies, he obtained his degree and became an auditor judge at the Versailles court in 1827. It was there that he made a decisive encounter, that of Gustave de Beaumont, a young substitute who would become his most intimate friend and lifelong collaborator. In 1830, the July Revolution broke out. The legitimate Bourbon monarchy fell, replaced by that of Louis Philippe. For Tocqueville, it was a moral heartbreak. Although a legitimist at heart, he understood that the movement towards equality was inevitable. Out of political realism, he took an oath to the new regime on August 16, 1830, an act he performed with profound bitterness and which his family experienced as a betrayal. Feeling stuck in his career and stifled by the Parisian political climate, he looked for a way out. With his friend Beaumont, he requested and obtained a mission from the Ministry of the Interior to travel to the United States to study the American penitentiary system. On April 2, 1831, the two friends embarked on a journey that would last nearly 10 months. But if the official pretext was the study of prisons, from which they would incidentally draw a report rewarded by the Académie Française in 1833, Tocqueville's true goal was much vaster. He went to America to observe the future. He wanted to understand what he considered the best available example of democracy. Chapter 2. The American Laboratory and the Dissection of Democracy. Thoughts and Works. Narrator. From this trip, Tocqueville brought back the material for what would become one of the greatest masterpieces of political philosophy, Democracy in America, the first volume of which was published in 1835, followed by the second in 1840. The success was immediate and resounding, propelling Tocqueville to the Academy of Moral and Political Sciences, and then to the Académie Française at only 36 years old. But what exactly is the main thesis of this work? For Tocqueville, the inevitable engine of modern history is what he calls the equalization of conditions. This is not a perfect economic equality, but a social state. There are no more castes, no more rigid hereditary hierarchies, and all individuals have, in principle, the same rights and the same chances. Democracy, for Tocqueville, is above all a state of society before being a form of government. However, and herein lies Tocqueville's genius, he does not settle for blind praise. He is an anxious observer. He theorizes the perpetual tension between equality and liberty. He understands that democratic peoples have an ardent, insatiable, eternal, invincible passion for equality. He even writes in a striking manner, "There is indeed a manly and legitimate passion for equality, which incites men to want all to be strong and esteemed. But there is also to be found in the human heart a depraved taste for equality, which impels the weak to want to bring the strong down to their level, and which reduces men to preferring equality in servitude to inequality in freedom. This obsessive quest for equality carries within it mortal dangers for freedom." Tocqueville identifies mainly three. The first is the tyranny of the majority. In a society where all opinions are of equal value, number becomes the sole rule of truth. The majority can impose its views in a despotic manner, marginalizing any dissenting thought and establishing a stifling conformism. The second great peril is individualism. Tocqueville gives this word a new meaning. It is not classic egoism, but, I quote him, a reflective and peaceable sentiment which disposes each citizen to isolate himself from the mass of his fellows and to withdraw into the circle of family and friends. With this little society formed to his taste, he gladly leaves the greater society to look after itself. By withdrawing into his private sphere, family and friends, the democratic citizen loses interest in public affairs. And this is where the third peril comes in, the most terrifying, which Tocqueville calls soft despotism. Since citizens isolate themselves, the state rushes into the void. An immense and tutelary central power takes charge of the lives of individuals to ensure their comfort. This power, says Tocqueville, does not break men's wills, but softens, bends, and guides them. It transforms the nation into a flock of timid and industrious animals, of which the government is the shepherd. But Tocqueville is not fatalistic. He observes in the United States the antidotes to these evils: administrative decentralization, judicial power, but above all, freedom of association and intermediary bodies, which force individuals to step out of their isolation to collaborate. He also highlights the fundamental role of religion as a moral brake on purely materialistic passion. Chapter 3. The Man of Action. The Politician and His Disillusionments. Tocqueville, as we have seen, is a thinker of genius, but he also has the ambition for action. As he himself would say with disarming lucidity, "I am worth more in thought than in action." Yet he threw himself into politics. In 1839, he was elected deputy for Valognes in the Manche, the region where his family castle is located, and he retained this seat until the coup d'état of 1851. In the chamber, he positioned himself on the center-left. He was not a peerless orator. His speech was elegant and substantial, but sometimes judged too theoretical. Nevertheless, his parliamentary work was rigorous. He defended anti-slavery positions, spoke out in favor of free trade, and wrote reports on prison reform and the colonization of Algeria. He was above all one of the few to perceive the seismic fault lines of the July monarchy. On January 27, 1848, from the tribune of the Assembly, he delivered a prophetic speech that froze the audience. While everything seemed calm, he declared, "Do you not feel, by some intuitive instinct which is not capable of analysis but which is certain, that the earth is quaking once again in Europe? Do you not feel a gale of revolution in the air? I believe that we are at this moment sleeping on a volcano. I am profoundly convinced of it." A few weeks later, the February Revolution of 1848 broke out, sweeping away the monarchy and establishing the Second Republic. Tocqueville, although not a Republican at heart, rallied to it out of duty. He was elected to the Constituent Assembly by universal suffrage. He joined the commission charged with drafting the new constitution. There, he waged a fierce battle against socialist ideas. He fiercely opposed the inclusion of the right to work, believing that this would transform the state into an absolute entrepreneur, the premise, according to him, of a communism that would destroy individual liberty. In June 1849, he accepted the Ministry of Foreign Affairs under the presidency of Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte. For 5 months, he tried to maintain France's voice in a boiling Europe. But Tocqueville detested the authoritarian maneuvers of Louis-Napoleon. When the latter fomented his coup d'état on December 2, 1851, Tocqueville was among the deputies who gathered to vote for the deposition of the prince-president. He was arrested, briefly incarcerated at the Château de Vincennes, then released. This was the end of his public political life. True to his principles, refusing to serve a despot, he retired. Chapter 4. The Return to History and Private Life. Rejected from political action, Tocqueville returned to his archives and his desk. In this withdrawal, he found the unfailing support of his wife, Mary Motley. Tocqueville had married this middle-class Englishwoman in 1835. It was a love marriage, against the advice of his aristocratic family, who had hoped for a prestigious match. Mary was not only a devoted companion, fluent in several languages, she was his first reader, his critic, and a true daily intellectual collaborator. It was in this retreat, already fighting the tuberculosis that was consuming him, that he first wrote his Recollections, Souvenirs, a masterpiece of political psychology that would only be published after his death. So fierce and uncompromising were the portraits he painted of his contemporaries. Then, in 1856, he published his second great work, The Old Regime and the Revolution. His thesis there was revolutionary. Contrary to popular belief, the French Revolution did not create a new world out of nothing. It merely completed, in a violent manner, a long process of administrative centralization and equalization of conditions that had been initiated under the old regime by the kings themselves. The Jacobin and then Napoleonic state simply took over from the monarchical state, perfecting the crushing of local liberties in favor of an all-powerful central power. Tocqueville died on April 16, 1859 in Cannes at the age of 53, leaving the second part of this masterful work unfinished. Chapter 5. The Explanation of the Oblivion and the Rediscovery. We have now reached an essential question. How could a thinker of such stature, recognized in the United States and England during his lifetime, experience such a long period in the wilderness in his own country, France? The explanation lies largely in the unclassifiable nature of the man and the very structure of the French intellectual landscape. Tocqueville belonged to no faction. He confessed it himself in a famous personal note from 1841. I have an intellectual inclination for democratic institutions, but I am an aristocrat by instinct. That is to say, I despise and fear the crowd. I passionately love liberty, legality, the respect for rights, but not democracy. This is the depths of my soul. Liberty is my foremost passion, that is the truth. This aristocratic liberalism, this posture of an engaged spectator, made him inaudible in a 19th and early 20th century France torn between two irreconcilable blocs. On one side, conservatives and reactionaries who rejected the revolution and dreamed of a return to the old order. On the other, socialists and romantic revolutionaries for whom real equality and class struggle were the only horizons. Tocqueville, who accepted social democracy as an inevitability while castigating the tyranny of the central state, was too democratic for the right of his time and far too liberal and anti-totalitarian for the nascent Marxist left. Moreover, his writing style, which was lucid, cold, and analytical, lacked the lyrical passion of a Victor Hugo or the fervor of a Karl Marx. He told the unvarnished truth without promising a utopia. It took until the mid-20th century, notably the 1950s, for Tocqueville's work to be truly rediscovered in France. This resurrection is largely due to the philosopher and sociologist Raymond Aron. At the height of the Cold War, facing the rise of Soviet totalitarianism and the hegemony of Marxism among French intellectuals, Aron seized upon Tocqueville to build a liberal political sociology. Aron showed that Tocqueville had seen correctly. It is not the contradictions of capitalism that are the key to modernity, but rather this tension between the passion for equality and the preservation of liberties. Following Aron, historians like François Furet would rely on Tocqueville to rethink the French Revolution outside the prism of class struggle. In the United States, contemporary sociologists like Richard Sennett or Robert Putnam still draw inspiration from him to analyze the withdrawal into oneself and the dissolution of civic bonds in modern man. Conclusion. Today, the work of Alexis de Tocqueville resonates with unsettling force. At a time when Western democracies are torn by populisms, when individualism has never been stronger, and when the temptation to rely on sprawling states is growing, rereading Tocqueville is a necessity. He reminds us that democracy is not a definitive achievement, but a fragile balance. It only survives through the engagement of its citizens, the strength of associations, and the jealous preservation of individual liberties against tyranny, whether it be that of a despot or that of a self-righteous majority. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed this exploration of the foundations of liberal thought, you will find the heritage of other great 19th century visionaries examined with this same perspective in our next episodes. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. See you very soon.